Good morning wherever you are in the world. We are Unique Labs and this is the Fashion of Web3 podcast where we deliver insights into one of the hottest Web3 industries.
We are Taco and Pauline, the co-founders of Unique Labs.
Welcome to the final episode of the first season of the Fashion of Web3 podcast. We have a very special guest for you today. He is one of the leading voices in the NFT space in general and also one of the biggest disruptors in the digital fashion and NFT space. He usually wears an orange beanie and looks a bit bored. Well, at least as CryptoPunk does. You probably know who I'm talking about by now, but if you don't, I will give you a little hint that will give it away. It starts with G and it's with money. Now, maybe you can't tell from my voice because I just have a terribly monotonous voice by nature, but I'm so excited to speak with gmoney today. I'm literally about to do a backflip off my table. So let's do this. Could you tell us something most people don't know about you?
I don't know. I feel like I'm a pretty open book besides showing my face. All right, here's something. Okay. I played the accordion growing up.
Oh, accordion?
The accordion, yeah. I hated every second of it. It was not my choice. So there's something interesting about me.
That's an interesting choice even for parents. I mean, I think I used to see people playing it in more in Eastern Europe.
Yeah, no, and it was the worst because I don't know if in Europe you guys had this show called Family Matters or Family Ties with Steve Urkel. And he played the accordion and I hated it. It was miserable. It was to the point where if I got in trouble, I had to go practice the accordion and I hated it, but I played it for a long time. I also played the piano. That was kind of my compromise, which I wasn't that great at the accordion, but I wasn't as good at the piano. But yeah, that's a little known fact about me.
Yeah, that's an interesting fact that I think nobody expects. And do you play anything? Do you remember anything?
I could probably I can play if I sat in front of a keyboard, I can play basics on the piano. What else did I play? I played the saxophone for a little bit growing up. I played the guitar a little bit in college, but mostly piano. I could play basic stuff on the piano now. But I don't know. I haven't picked up an accordion in a really long time, so I couldn't tell you if I could play it or not. I think I could play something if you gave me an hour.
Fingers remember.
Yeah, exactly. It's like riding a bicycle.
Maybe you can record us the new podcast intro if you want.
Yeah, exactly. As an accordion entry.
So jump a little bit maybe into your background, what you were doing before you joined the Web3 space.
Yeah, so I have a background in finance. I was always interested in the stock market since I was a really young kid. When I graduated college, I went to go work with my dad in a family business, which was a very bespoke industry where he manufactured really high-end products. Between 10 and 20 per year. And that was the family business. And I was set to take it over. And I went to go work with them for a couple of years. But after a couple of years, it just wasn't necessarily what I was that passionate about. And it wasn't scalable enough for me to be really interested in it long term. And I was always interested in the stock market and one of those. And even while I was working with my father in the family business, I had experienced some success in the market. I remember in the summer of 2003 when I was interning in New York City, I was on the subway and I noticed that everybody had these white headphones in their ears. And this is back when the MP3 market was massively fragmented. And, that was the original iPod, right? And so I bought Apple stock when it was $10. I don't know what it is split adjusted right now, but it was $10 a share. I bought the $20 calls for 62 cents a share each, and I sold them for $49 a share each. And that was up until last year, that was my best trade that I had ever had. And that was really just noticing trends, right? And I did something again a few years later, very similarly with True Religion brand jeans, which were all the rage in the mid 2000s, mid to late 2000s before 2010. And the stock was publicly traded. So I, noticed that my fashionable female friends were all wearing these jeans because, they had a good fit. And I was like, all right, well, New York is like one of the centers of fashion. If these fashionable women are wearing them, then probably it catches on as a trend. So I ended up buying the stock when it was under $5. It eventually got bought out for, I think, $28 by VF Corp a few years ago. And, I rode it to like the mid 20s. But like, I think that those are two examples of fashion was something, and I consider Apple to be in the fashion business now, right? Because I think, as we all know, like tech is fashion and it is consumer discretionary, right? Because it is something. It's like, as a consumer, you have money and you have to pay for your things that you need to survive, but then you have a certain amount, and that amount is not infinity, that you can spend on things that you want to, right? That are discretionary items. And I think tech really falls into that category. And so like I realized that I was just a very, very I just paid attention to the things around me, right? Of just paying attention to, what were people wearing? What were people doing? And I think when I got into the Web3 space, it was very much the same type of thing, right? Like I got into crypto in 2017, but I got into NFTs in 2020. And one of the things that made NFTs click for me right away was a few months before, because I found NFTs in August of 2020, and I started playing Fortnite in March of 2020 when COVID started. And again, like just paying attention to trends, I remember playing with my friends and their nephews, and these kids are like 10, 12 years old. And the first thing that they would ask me is, what skins did you buy? And so, at first I was like, what skins? Like, they don't give me any special powers. I'm not interested in this stuff. But then I realized that that kid is 12 years old. 10 years from now, he's going to be 22. He's going to have his own disposable income, and he's going to be totally okay with owning a purely digital asset. Doesn't even need to be physical. And so like really, really similarly to kind of what I saw with Apple and what I saw with True Religion, more than a decade earlier, I saw the same type of thing happening where it's like, okay, that is going to drive a mega long-term trend over the next decade plus. How, as an investor, as a consumer, how do I get involved in this? And how do I ride that trend? And at the time, metaverse was not a play. It was not something people spoke about, right? Like there were no publicly traded metaverse companies. Facebook hadn't even rebranded at that point. And so, I was like, I don't know how I'm going to do it, but once I see it, I'm going to know it. And then when I found NFTs, I was like, wow, this is your skin on Twitter. This is your skin on Discord. And it just like immediately made sense to me. And, I remember some of my earliest conversations that I had in the space was I wanted to make a metaverse fashion brand. Like, that was one of the first things that I wanted to do right out of the gate. I just thought it was too early. I thought in like Q3, Q4 of 2020, nobody's hanging out in the metaverse. So who's going to buy clothes for the metaverse, right? Like, why are you going to buy a t-shirt for the metaverse if you're not even hanging out in it? And so I was like, all right, like the time will come. It's just the time is not there yet. I've noticed with like all my predictions and my theses of the space, crypto moves at a much faster rate than I could have anticipated. Like, for instance, when I bought my CryptoPunk, I thought that my goal was to sell it at either Christie's or Sotheby's in 5 years and be the first CryptoPunk sale that they ever did. And like it happened 5 months later, right? Like a Larva Lab sold CryptoPunks literally 5 months after. I was like, oh, this will happen in 5 years. So like my thesis has been right generally. It's just the timing has been happening much quicker than I thought. And so that's why after I did the drop with Adidas last year in December, I was like, okay, now is the time, right? Now is the time. I have the right team around me to do this. I feel confident. I feel like the tech is there, and I can create the experience that I personally want to see as a consumer, and really kind of like dive into it. And that really was the genesis of 90cc and how it ended up here with this launch, a little over 30 days ago.
Well, thanks for sharing that. I think we covered a lot of things already, and we want to dive into basically like the first 5 questions in one, which is, I know that's great because we're actually saving time this way, meaning we have time for questions. So about Adidas, like the last point that you brought, We wanted to ask you what made you work with them, and maybe also more generally, what makes you decide to work on a project or not.
Yeah, so with Adidas, that was so fortuitous and so interesting. I had somebody from their team just randomly message me on Twitter, and they were like, "Hey, I love what you're doing. I work at Adidas. I'd love to chat with you." It was something like literally as simple as that. And I get a bunch of DMs, and even back then I was getting a bunch of DMs. And to me, I was like, well, I don't know if this person works at Adidas, but what if they do work at Adidas? And it's like, what's 15 minutes, what's 20 minutes of my time to find out if this person does? Because if it's real and Adidas is seriously considering this space, I want them to succeed, right? Because there's two things that I'm really trying to focus on. And one is disruption, right? And with that, I've angel invested in close to 100 deals in the space, helping back founders that I think are doing really cool things. And now, obviously, with the formulation of Admit One and 90cc, of doing it myself. And then two is adoption, right? And to me, is like, in order to get adoption, you need a lot of these culturally relevant brands coming into the space, right? So that's why, to me, Nike and Adidas coming into the space was probably the most significant event to happen in crypto in the last 5+ years, because they're probably two of the most culturally relevant brands on the planet, recognizable by pretty much everyone. And the fact that they both announced that they were coming into the NFT and Web3 space, I think, is very, very significant. So, it was just fortuitous, when I was talking to Ben over at Adidas, and he was sharing his vision and I was sharing my vision, and we'd have like a 30-minute call schedule, and we'd talk for like 2.5 hours. It was obvious that we were both trying to accomplish a lot of the same things, sitting from very different seats. And it was super organic. We continued the conversations. He would say, "Hey, we're working on this. What do you think of this?" And I'd provide my feedback. And ultimately they brought on Punk's comic and Bored Ape Yacht Club, and the three of us all collaborated together. And I thought it was like really awesome, the way they came into the space, very community oriented, and they've been building silently since then. I thought that was amazing, right? And I always get hit up a lot of times for a lot of brands, a lot of people that want to do stuff. I say no most of the time, because it's just not on brand with, let's say, what I'm trying to do, or sometimes it's just not innovative enough. Because I do think that, like, you're gonna have to have, it's gonna be like a scale, right? And it's like, if you're a crypto native, you can afford to be very disruptive and very innovative, because you don't have that much brand equity on the line, right? But when you come in with a major brand, a legacy brand, there's a lot of brand equity on the line, where if you mess this up, the stock price could get hurt, or the brand perception can get hurt. And that's worth billions of dollars to these companies. So they have to guard that very, very closely. So I understand that. So I think that there's always like that give and take, right? Of like, what would this do for the space, both from an innovation point of view, but also from an adoption point of view, right? And so that, to me, has been the two things that I kind of like guide that guide my decision making, right? Also, like, with being on brand, right? Like, I'm not personally, like, I want to be doing things that are very authentic to who I am as a person, and I want to do things that are very authentic to things that I think are cool. So, like, somebody were to come to me and be like, "Hey, like, we want you to be involved in this. We're going to pay you a bunch of money, but it's not something that I'm really excited about." I don't want to do it, right? Because there's going to be other opportunities for me to get involved in that I'm actually excited about, right? And that has been kind of my guiding force.
Oh, it's really exciting, especially the whole journey that happened in quite a short time, and impossible in the, let's say, before Web3 space. It actually leads me to my next question. But how then the next collaboration came in? And correct me if I'm wrong, but you also were part of the collaboration between Adidas and Prada.
Yeah, so I helped a little bit on that, right? Like, that was born out of the collaboration that Adidas and Prada had outside of Web3, right? Because they collaborated together last year on cross brand product, which I thought was cool, and it culminated in them doing this NFT drop together, which was very community oriented, done with Zach Lieberman, who is an OG an OG algorithmic artist, right? And so I thought it was really, really cool. And again, I back to like my previous point is I think as these brands, Adidas had that working task force, right? They had been basically in the space for a year, for around a year up until that point by January of this year. And Prada was more just entering the space, and they wanted to use a trusted partner in Adidas that they were already working with and kind of like learn the space a little bit, right? Because again, they have a lot on the line, right? In terms of brand equity. So it was very cool and fun and interesting to meet people from the Prada team and to be talking to them over the last few months and hear their thoughts internally and like their concerns, right? Because the interesting thing is whenever like brands approach me, everybody has a different thing that they're thinking about, right? So like a different thing that they're trying to accomplish, right? So it's like, do you want to make this easy accessible? Do you want a focus on zero emission transactions? And like every brand has different things and different brand values. So I think it's always interesting, and that's why I think I like being involved more on the strategic side, is because it's like a different thing you have to solve for each time, as opposed to just coming on and being like, hey, like, as like promotion, right? Like that to me is really boring and much less compelling. I would much rather be there working on like strategic, on I'm figuring out how things work strategically and like what is it that you want to see from the community in 3 to 5 years, and how do you start building towards that now?
That's interesting. And because you were also new to the fashion industry, what did you learn and take away from these collaborations, or like working on the collaborations? And maybe what's your favorite part?
So I mean, I think the thing I've learned, right? But this is also, I think it happens in any thing that has physical product, is the supply chain issues that have really been exacerbated since the beginning of COVID, right? And like literally lead times that used to be probably like non-existent are now taking like several weeks to a few months, which has been interesting, right? Of like planning, and you could have a great idea. Like I think the interesting thing about NFTs is right, like we could have a great idea right here on this call right now, and if we can like get the design down, like we could like drop it within like 2 days. You know what I mean? Like it's literally just like planning and figuring it out and making sure we time it and this and that. But like from like idea inception to maybe execution, it could take a few days, it could take a few hours, it could take a week, right? And whereas when you're working in the physical world, it's going to take weeks to months. And I think that is one of the limitations of what we see in the space is, it's like, all right, you have to be a little patient, because not everything happens over the course of like a 3 to 5 day hype cycle. And so I thought that was super interesting. What the thing that I've really begun to enjoy a lot, and I've liked it since the beginning, is the design process of like kind of like paying attention to details that maybe as a consumer I didn't pay as much attention to before, but really understanding that like a small change in a detail could affect the entire experience, right? And it's like, how do you curate? And and I'll use the 90cc example of like just thinking about the stitching. Where we put the stitching, what kind of stitching do we use, right? Like where do we put the labels, right? And what do we want to do, and like how does that affect the experience, which could be just like maybe 99% of people see it as an oversight, but how does that 1% perceive it, right? And I think you see the same thing with regards to anything that's done at the high end, right? Whether it be watch collecting or wine, and like that difference between a $10,000 bottle and $1,000 bottle of wine, probably 99% of the world probably couldn't tell the difference, right? But it's really that 1%, or even that like 1% of the 1% that can tell that difference, that where all that value is. And I think that's really interesting when you look at anything that has any kind of craftsmanship, is that attention to detail that maybe is usually overlooked in the essence of saving time or cost, is really what adds to that value long term, because that's what the real connoisseurs of anything, whatever industry that you're focused on, really attribute that extra percentage of value towards.
Oh, I really love that you brought this aspect of like the details, like how you design the garment and the collection, and all the things, like the little thing that most people maybe don't even think why they like the piece, but then the final product is kind of completely changed the feeling and the vibe that it gives. Where did you take this inspiration of your first collection, and how do you think about, fashion is not only about the wearing stuff, it's the whole experience, like, when you touch the materials, like what kind of feelings it left, and again, like about the stitches, like are they inside or outside, like how they're done. So the tactile experience is very much important in a real life and physical fashion. What are your thoughts like about when it comes to a digital one?
All right, cool. Yeah. So, my inspiration was really born out of, I wanted to make an aesthetic that I would be proud to wear, right? So it's like when people know me on Twitter and on Instagram, in a digital format, people know me as my CryptoPunk ape, right? But and I love my CryptoPunk ape. That's literally my online identity. But when I'm out in the real world, I don't necessarily want to walk around with a picture of my CryptoPunk on my shirt, right? Like, because that's just not the aesthetic that I wear in real life. But like, I still want to signal that I'm a crypto native, right? And so like, as I looked around the landscape of like, okay, how can I signal that I'm a crypto native and still get the quality of product that I would want to wear, right? Like if I walked into a Prada store or a Dior store and I wanted to buy a shirt or a jacket or whatever it is, yeah, I can go in there, I can buy it, I can walk out, I can wear it. I know I'm wearing a high quality garment that I'm proud to wear, that makes me feel a certain way, but it doesn't signal that I'm a crypto native, right? I would have to signal to people in the real world in some other way that I'm a crypto native, however it is, right? Like right now, it's probably by showing people like what's on my OpenSea wallet, right? Like being like, here, look at my NFTs, or maybe having a background on my Apple Watch or whatever it is, right? There's no way for me to really signal that, right? And this is where I think merch comes in for a lot of different collections. But that's just not my aesthetic that I personally would want to wear. So I wanted to make an aesthetic that I would be proud to wear, that had the quality that I wanted to wear, and also would be in the fashion and in the style that I would wear it, right? So that really was like the main thing, right? And I think you can kind of see probably some hints from like streetwear, right? Like Virgil, and like a lot of the stuff that he's done. Some Heron Preston, right? In the satin patch on the outside. I personally have been in love with like the stuff that Martin Margiela has done really early on in his career, and I think that has influenced fashion over the last 2 decades, 3 decades, regardless. And I think that has been more my aesthetic, and that's why I lean towards that. And that I think it shows in the first one, right? It's probably more of a cleaner look than you're used to seeing from most things in the NFT space right now, and that's fine, right? Because like everybody is going to have their personal style, and people will mix and match stuff from different collections just the way they do in the real world. And so I think that by creating this, it's just showing people that there's other aesthetics out there, and it's the one that I want to work with. With regards to the digital stuff, I've thought a lot about it as well. And the reason why I'm going physical first instead of digital first, because I do think there's obviously, I think we can all agree that digital fashion is going to be a thing. The issue that I have with it right now is building for the metaverse only right now, in my opinion, is hard, right? Because what's the daily active user count, across decentralized metaverses? Now, if you want to argue that Fortnite is a metaverse and some of these games are metaverses, then sure, that number is significantly higher. But like, we don't, as a creator, like we don't have access to creating things that get shown in Fortnite or things that get shown in Grand Theft Auto. So we have to kind of be catering towards that decentralized metaverse stuff at the moment. And I just think that not enough people are interacting there on a daily basis for me to necessarily want to build things exclusively for the digital metaverse, because there could be a metaverse that gets built like 2 years from now that is the one that like scales. You know what I mean? It's like when you look at like search engines in 1997, I think it was Lycos was the number one search engine on the planet. And then Google came around and now Lycos doesn't exist, right? And so, it doesn't necessarily mean that because you're there first that you're going to be the standard. So I think applying the same thesis to metaverses is I kind of am okay with taking a wait and see approach to see, okay, where is it that people congregate? Where is it that there's product market fit, that, we hit that Schelling point of getting enough users into that metaverse where it's like, okay, now I want to put dev resources to building for that metaverse, right? And building product for that metaverse. And so like, that's kind of been my thesis around it, right? Like we are launching with some wearables that are linked to the shirt, right? It's basically the shirt as a wearable as a digital wearable, but we're using partners for that. And it's not necessarily the main focus out of the gate. To me, it's more about creating that experience in the real world that can then be translated over to the digital side at some point in the future.
I was wondering, and in terms of problems that the current platforms have, like interoperability, and what do you think does it take for us to be able to create proper digital identities? Do you have anything in mind that could improve it? And what do you want to see?
So it's really interesting because like I've had a lot of people be like, hey, you should drop a PFP project. And I've been like very resistant to it because I kind of, and I'd love to hear your guys' opinion on this, because I feel pretty strongly that, and I felt like this for a long time, that I don't necessarily want people to change their identity to show that they support me, right? So it's like, if let's say the 90cc or the Admit One PFP project was like a giraffe, I don't want people to have to be a giraffe in order to say I support gmoney, right? Because like in the real world, right, like you mix and match your designers, right? So it's like, it's not where it's like, well, I'm only wearing, seldomly, like sometimes they'll probably be like, well, I'm only going to wear this designer today, right, in the outfit. But generally, like in your outfit, like I'll wear Adidas shorts with Nike sneakers, like I will mix and match all these different things. Like I'll wear Prada with Louis Vuitton, right? And all these things. So I feel like in the metaverse, I don't know if I necessarily want people to be like, okay, I support gmoney, so I'm always going to be a giraffe, right? I want people to be like, I feel like being a giraffe today, so I'll be a giraffe, and I'll be a hippopotamus tomorrow because that's how I feel. But like, I want people to be like, oh yeah, I'll wear something 90cc because I like the look and I like the feel and I like all these things, that it's like, yeah, that's almost like a way of showing you support gmoney without having to change your total identity. That I've that's how I feel about this PFP phenomenon. I'm always open to changing ideas on it, but at the moment, that's kind of how I felt since the beginning. I'd love to know what are your guys' thoughts on that?
That's actually really interesting. And I would say it's also controversial because do you agree, like, that when you create your own identity and you support the project or even like a multiple projects, it's like good to have some diversity and ability to do it in a different ways. But at the same time, like, you also built your own identity like around the PFP, which I find it really cool, to be honest. And I think, when I meet people in the Twitter spaces or whatever, and when they're sticking to one kind of like identity, I'm 100% accept it. Just accept, like, I don't know, like I know how Paulina looks like, and it's, for me, it's like a whole person. But I do agree that it, for me, it's a bit limiting, I would say. I love when I have that diversity of options, how I can express myself and my identity. And actually for us, when it comes to building the identity in the space, and it's kind of like what we're working on, we don't want to focus on a body first, because we think that identity is a bit more than just our bodies, but also like if we talk about the clothes, how do you express yourself? Like, how do you express even your mood or your what kind of tribe, or like, what kind of group of people you belong to, what kind of signal you want to send to the community, like what you stand for. What kind of collections you support, like the artist, like what was their idea behind the collection. So I do agree with your points, because I love when there is more options and there is no restrictions, and I don't feel that if I'm not using my PFP, then I'm kind of losing my identity, the one that I built in the space. But at the same time, I kind of also like it.
Right. No, I agree with you in the sense that, like, as from a brand perspective, right? Like I would love to, like, brand like whatever it is that I brand. Like if it was giraffes, right? Then be like, yeah, like I think from a branding perspective, it's like, yeah, of course you want people rocking your PFP, right? Because then they're sending that signal out, and that's like, oh, the tribalism of it, right? And really feeds into it. But I do think, like, and I know I'm in the minority here where, like, I never change my PFP. I very, very rarely change it. And there are people that will change it to, like, oh, like, well, this thing, I just minted this one and this one's my favorite. And this is gonna be my PFP for like the next week until like I find like my next thing, and people go around changing them. So I know I'm like in that minority of like, this is my PFP and this is the only way people recognize me. But I did that for like a different reason, right? For gmoney branding. But it's an interesting phenomenon. I'm really interested to see how it develops over time. But I agree with you. Like, but by giving people that optionality to kind of be whoever they want to be, they could still, like, if they always wanted to be that giraffe, they could always be that giraffe and just change whatever it is, like, so like their accessories, right, and how they accessorize. But it doesn't necessarily mean they always have to be. Yeah, I think it's like an evolving topic. I think it's gonna be really interesting. I think when we start getting into more immersive worlds is when we really start seeing what's going to be like people's behaviors with regards to this. Because I think right now in a 2D world, maybe people are like, all right, that's my PFP, that's how I'm known. But like, maybe in this meeting I want to be dressed a certain way, and then the next meeting maybe I'm doing an investor presentation and I need to be dressed a different way, and then the next meeting I'm doing like happy hour and I want to be dressed a different way. So I think it's going to be super interesting to see how that evolves.
It's kind of nice to have different options, and fast forward a few years, there will be some type of interoperability, and maybe you choose to take one personality to different platforms, and maybe you want to switch them up and you want to be a different person in different platforms, which makes sense because you're usually not the same person on LinkedIn as you are on Twitter, for example.
No, because like I think it's like even more extreme, right? Is like, I'm sure, let's say, your favorite brand is Prada, right? And like you had a group of friends that you talked to Prada about, but then also like your favorite soccer team or football team is Manchester United, right? And like you don't necessarily have the same group of friends that are talking about Prada that are talking about Manchester United. It's like humans we're naturally diverse, right? And so like I have a group of people that I will talk to certain things about that is still who I am as a human being. It's just not like, all encompassing all the time. You know what I mean? So I think that's super interesting. I'm sure you guys have probably thought about it a lot, considering you're working on digital identity. I'd love to know, like, what is it that you guys are working on and how are you thinking about the problem?
We are actually looking at digital identity creation from different standpoints. And one is the visual factor, of course. The second one is your skills, your reputation, and the way you want to present yourself in terms of your professional life, maybe. And then how can digital fashion come in and help to like shape that identity? How can we actually make people enjoy digital fashion to make a living in the space? This is kind of one side of how we're approaching that topic.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned that about how can people enjoy digital fashion. There's a member of the Admit One community who recently wrote an article. I believe his Twitter, their Twitter is The Naked Collector, and they kind of discussed where there is no runway for digital fashion at the moment, right? Like there's no way to show your look, right? And it's like it's almost like I've been thinking about that a lot over the last week and a half since I read that. And I was like, yeah, like that's super interesting, right? Because it's like, let's say I do buy this one of one by my favorite designer. Like, how do I show that off outside of like, posting it in Twitter or, you know what I mean? It's like, there has to be a way for me to kind of like show off that look, whether it be on a Zoom call or, in a metaverse meeting or whatever, which I think is super interesting.
Okay, maybe AR. We kind of mentioned the things about how you can be presented on different platforms, even like on the calls, or again, like if we're thinking a little bit future, like how we have AR lenses and stuff. Like, what is your take, like maybe about even the timing to decide like when it will be more mainstream? But what are your takes about?
So I do think that I think AR is super interesting. I think that we're probably not going to see mass AR adoption until we have the hardware where we can have like, Google glasses or spectacles that we can wear that can like, you'd be like, oh, I want people to see, a me on fire or something like when they look at me, right? Because you're going to need that filter that's in place in order for that to happen. Because I just think right now, like, it's just not scalable where it's like, oh, like, hold on, let me take out my phone and like look at you through my phone in order to see the way you want me to look at you. I think we just need like the hardware to get there. I think it's super interesting. I think a lot of fun can be had with it, but I just think the tech is probably a couple years away on the hardware side, but I think it's super intriguing, and I think it's cool that people are building for it now. Again, like this to me is very much in the realm of kind of like metaverse fashion right now, where it's like, I think once we start seeing adoption and we start seeing, okay, what is the most consumer friendly way for this to happen, then it'll be like easy to kind of be like, all right, this is what we're going to build, and we're going to build it on this.
And in terms of 90cc, where do you see like the brand going in the future, maybe in 5 to 10 years, or maybe less? That's a long time.
Yeah, in 5 to 10 years, in 3 to 5 years, I mean, I just want it to be synonymous with like, being crypto and being luxury, right? Like that to me is like, I'm building for the crypto native. I want to build something that I would be proud to wear. Like, hopefully like whatever garment I make is something that I would definitely be happy to wear. And I hope that others will feel the same way, knowing that it's still the same craftsmanship and the same quality that you would get from a traditional luxury house, a legacy house, but then also signal that you're a crypto native. Because to me right now, what's missing is, product that is made for us by us, right? At the quality that we want, right? Because I think right now what exists is not necessarily the quality that I would be, I would want to wear or, put on in a premium situation or whatever, what have you. So I really want 90cc to kind of grow into that.
What are you like working on at the moment? And maybe how do you split your time? I've always asked myself, like, how do you make time for everything?
Let's see. How do I spend my time? I mean, my time is probably like fully focused on Admit One and 90cc and opportunities that come up for the brand. I try to focus as much as I possibly can. It's been a long process of like filtering out like requests and conversations that I don't necessarily want to have, that like sometimes when I get on, it's like, oh, this isn't necessarily a call that I is going to go anywhere. I'd say a year ago at this time, maybe I had like, 2 or 3 of those calls a day. Now I probably have like 2 or 3 of those calls a week. So it's just kind of like a filtering process of it. But I do spend most of my time, almost all of it, thinking about 90cc, Admit One, and like potential collaborations. What are cool things that we can do to disrupt and push the space forward? So like, I'd say like close to 100% of my time is spent on that. Probably the parts that aren't is just like administrative stuff to run the business and stuff like that, answering emails and what have you.
How do you think we can bring more people into Web3 and specifically from the fashion side?
I mean, I think education, right? And I think kind of like also like good design, right? Like I think that to me, that's kind of what I was when I design stuff, I'm always thinking from like, okay, if I were to meet, let's say one of the coolest people in the world from a design perspective, and I were to show them my work, would I be proud of it? Or would I be proud to show it to them? And two, what would their reaction be? Right? Would they be like, ooh, like, that's cheesy, right? That's corny. Or would it be like, oh, that's really cool, right? And I'll take Admit One as an example. If I had met, let's say Virgil before he passed, and I had named, my NFT community like the gmoney Alpha Club or the Black Card or like whatever it is to kind of like signify premium, whatever, I think the reaction I would have gotten is like, oh, what's the name of your NFT project? And it's like, oh, well, it's the gmoney Alpha Club. It's kind of like roll your eyes, like, well, all right, cool. Like that's kind of dorky, it's cheesy, whatever. But when I named it Admit One, I think the name is intriguing, right? It's like admit one to what? Like, what is this for? And I think the artwork and the design is intriguing as well, right? Because we're sitting here talking about the future, and it's literally just a picture of a retro ticket stub that we all got when we were little kids. That was like a throwaway stub. And so I think that, like, it leaves a couple more questions than answers. And I think from like a design perspective, that's kind of what you want to do, right? Like, you kind of want to intrigue somebody and get them to want to learn more and to want to kind of go down that rabbit hole. And that to me was really when I design something, this is from the perspective that I'm designing from, right? Is like, how can I make something that I think is cool, that I also can open up the doors and open up, maybe somebody hears about it and they're like, all right, cool, that's fine. They don't want to go down the rabbit hole. That's totally fine. But maybe they get intrigued enough that they do want to go down the rabbit hole, and they're like, all right, well, this is very different than what I thought. I thought it was just a bunch of, JPEGs of animals on the internet, right? And it's like, wow, this is actually more than that. So I think that is really kind of the key, is just like kind of making it accessible and and piquing people's interest enough that they do want to go and learn it on their own and not feel like they're going back to school and having to do homework and do things that they don't want to do.
So making it more accessible, making it easy to use. These are like some of the key points that people really need, not only, of course, regarding digital fashion, but like more generally regarding NFTs. Slowly coming to an end with our questions. Do you have a life motto?
A life motto? I would say, so when I started Admit One, I wrote this manifesto of kind of like, I think it's 30, let me take a look. It's 30 something, it might be 31 things that kind of just, things that I picked up along the way. It's 31. Yeah. I think probably number one is always act with integrity, which is number one on my manifesto. And it kind of goes from there, because I do think that, like, you want to do the next right thing, right? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, we're not in charge of the outcome. All we can really, and I think as humans, right, like, we always, like, I want to do the best, right? I want to control as many situations as I possibly can and get the best outcome that I possibly can. But at the end of the day, there's so many things that are outside of our control that the only thing I can do is do what I think is the next right thing. And usually that involves acting with integrity, right? And doing the right thing, even if it isn't necessarily like going to lead to the best outcome, right? Because I think ultimately in the long run, it will. And so that to me is probably my number one thing, is just act with integrity, be a person of integrity.
Yeah, I think it was a great ending of the podcast. Okay, I want to thank you. Thank you for being with us and having these great conversations and giving us insights on your decision making and your goals. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you. And thank you for having me on. And really excited to see what you guys are working on too at some point. So please keep me up to date with all the things you guys are working on, because I'd love to see that as well.